All right, hey everybody, this is Charles Dobbins, the multifamily attorney and the founder of the Multifamily Investing Academy, and I have the pleasure of interviewing today Frank Rolfe. Now, let me give you a little bit of Frank's background. He's been an investor in mobile home parks for almost 2 decades now and has owned and operated hundreds of mobile home parks during that time, and he's currently ranked, get a load of this, he's currently ranked with his partner, because he doesn't want to take all the credit for himself, with his partner Dave Reynolds as the 5th largest mobile home park owner in the U.S., with over 250 communities spread out over 25 states. Now, this guy obviously knows mobile homes. Now, I got to tell you, I'm going to read out loud the next story, which I absolutely love, because I've had stories like this myself in my investing days. He says, when I bought Glen Haven in Dallas, Texas, that was his first investment. He said, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing or how a mobile home park worked. If I had, I would have never bought that park, as it saddled me with a master metered gas and electric system, 2 of the biggest challenges a mobile home park owner could face, and a tenant base that was straight out of Fox's TV show Cops. We had carnival workers, hookers, the absolute dregs of society. It even had a wrestling ring in the back. A few years later, I had unbelievably turned that dump into a nice, quiet family community with a neighborhood feel and kids riding bicycles down the streets. So, Frank, in other words, you ruined the place. It used to be fun. Yeah, and we used to go there for Saturday nights.
Exactly. That's one way you could look at it, yes, I suppose.
That's fantastic. But, man, I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call listening in, full-time real estate investors, long-term real estate investors, who all have had that type of property. And I got to tell you something.
Sure.
This is. I want you to correct my statement, because what I teach my students is, I'm in this with you from the very beginning. I don't want you to make any mistakes. I've made all the mistakes for both of us. You don't need to make any more. And if you buy your first deal the wrong way, you'll never do another deal. But you are living proof that that isn't necessarily true. So what did you do to turn Glen Haven around and propel you into number 5?
Yeah, well, Charles, what happened was I rapidly realized, after self-managing Glen Haven for a year, that what I'd done is that there was great promise in the industry, just not the way that I'd gone about it. So after that first property, I vowed never to buy another one like it. So my first one became kind of a test kitchen to my involvement in the industry. Now, the Glen Haven had a very happy ending, because what happened was I bought it. It was a dump. It was half full. And then they shut another mobile home park down in Dallas, and they had to find a place for the people to go. So I went to the owner of that park, and I was able to score about 40 families. They were all Hispanic, great people. They moved into Glen Haven. It changed the entire atmosphere of Glen Haven from that crazy weirdo dump to a nice family environment. Then that scared away my carnival workers and all my strange people who did not like any sense of normalcy or civilization. And then they were replaced with good people again. So Glen Haven, in the end, the only things I could not fix about Glen Haven were the fact that it had a terrible location, that it had master metered power. I fixed the master metered gas by going to propane, but it was never the ideal property, but it had ideal numbers. So I bought it for $400,000. I sold it for $1,525,000.
Wow.
So financially, it was a good deal. It just it definitely aged me and drove me crazy, but it was a great learning experience.
Okay, now a couple of questions. First off is, so you kind of got lucky in the turn of Glen Haven.
Very lucky.
Okay, so it wasn't like you came in there with this great marketing plan that turned it around. Somebody else just shut down their park, and you just picked up the pieces.
Correct. Now, the one thing that I was correct on when I bought Glen Haven was I owned a billboard company, and I was very used to seeing zonings. So when I sold the billboard company and bought the mobile home park, I knew that mobile home park zonings are extremely rare. So I was really buying the MH zoning just because I knew nothing more than it was scarce. And I also thought the rent seemed crazy low, because Glen Haven was renting their lots for about $195 a month in Dallas. And it made no economic sense. I also, when I bought the park, the reason I got it so cheap was it was losing $2,000 a month. And I was able to rapidly solve that because the guy was buying bulk cable for the park, even though the park was half empty, and then the other half, almost no one was using it. So by shutting the cable off, I got it to break even. So there were elements that it wasn't all luck. I mean, there was some brain power in it, but scoring half occupancy in one move, that was definitely luck. If the guy had not shut his park down, Glen Haven might be just waffling around still at half occupancy. Who knows?
Yeah, and you'd be back working for a bit more, which brings me to my next question is, how did you get into the business? Like, what were you doing before then? Were you a full-time real estate investor? What made you think that you could own a mobile home park?
Sure. What happened was I got out of college from Stanford in 3 years, and I wanted to go to business school. And back in those days, which in the 70s, 80s, a standard business school application, you would try and start a business, and that would be your essay. So I had to start a business. People threw out different ideas. Some were stupid. One adult told me, why don't you try build some billboards because they're low management, and then you could just sell them off. So I started building billboards. And then 14 years later, I was the largest private owner of billboards in Dallas-Fort Worth. So I had 300 billboards along Dallas's highway. So I sold that in 96 to a public company. And then I thought, well, what do I do next? Because I was only about 36 years old. And so I had built 2 billboards on this old dumpy mobile home park called Glen Haven. So I called up the owner of the park named Ron, who I talked to probably about once a year, because he would normally call me and ask me to run errands for him. And I was out and about checking billboards. Normally go by the park and knock on the door and see why the manager wouldn't answer his call. That was the number one way I normally communicate with Ron. So I called him up and told him I'd sold the billboards off and was looking to buy a new business or get into something. And he sold me the park in just that first phone call, in one call. He just told me that he thought I was a perfect guy for the park, and he'd sell to me right then on the phone for $400,000, $10,000 down. He would carry 390 for 30 years. So I said, Ron, there's got to be something wrong with your property, buddy, if you're going to sell it like that on the phone. And he said, yeah, it's losing $2,000 a month. And that's how I got into it.
Oh, okay. That is a great story because it leads into so much that I teach. Always beware of 100% seller financing. And, now we know why, but there can be a silver lining in it as well. And wow, that is a great story. So you didn't attend MHU. No, nobody was telling you. And
didn't even read a book. Nothing. I just went in stone cold. Nothing more than my past experience in the billboard industry and common sense as an adult, neither of which help you when you change into a different industry. So, but I struggled and survived and learned from Glen Haven, and then I started buying more parks.
I got to tell you, first of all, clarification. When you first said it, I thought you said Biltmore, and I was thinking, okay, Asheville, North Carolina, Biltmore, but you're saying billboard.
Billboard signs, billboard signs, those big signs you see along the highway.
Biltmore. Okay, I got you. Oh, that's okay. All right. So you just looked at the financials and you said, okay, I'm a businessman and I know what I got to do. I got to increase income. I got to reduce expenses, and we'll make this thing happen. All right. Now I'll tell you something. I know multifamily better than anyone I've ever met. It just totally makes sense to me. Mobile home parks are a totally different breed. And I, I'll tell you the things that come back to me about mobile home parks are, renting the lot, owning the trailer, or renting the trailer. Like there are so many different ways to make money in mobile home parks. Walk me through it so that I have a better understanding of how it works.
Okay, well, you just hit the nail on the head. There's 2 different schools of the industry. One is focused on homes, one's focused on land. We're the group that is focused on land. That's what the majority of the industry is all about. So there's another sector where you look at mobile home park as what we call a detached apartment complex. So it would harken back to multifamily. So you see that model more in the South, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, a lot of those states where lot rents are very low and the mobile home lot rents are very high, so you have a big spread. But in most of the states that we're in 20, 25 states, our lot rents are fairly high. They run typically 400 to 500 a month in a lot of these places, and the homes rent for 700 or 800. So there's not enough spread to make money on the detached apartment model. So we do it strictly on land. So our goal is to own none of the homes.
Really interesting. But and what do you do if somebody doesn't pay the rent on the land?
They don't pay the rent on the land, we file eviction, and typically they'll either pay up or run off. And if they run off, we take the home through abandonment law, and then we sell or rent it to somebody else and go back to being in the land business.
Oh, okay. So that's how you do it. It's not like you're accumulating. You don't want to accumulate those mobile homes, by abandonment. You get rid of them as soon as you get them.
Minute we get them, we sell them for whatever we have in them, or just what we can get. We take losses on homes all the time.
Okay. Now, what about the why are those areas that you mentioned, those states down in the South, why do they do it differently than everybody else? Is there a zoning?
That's a great question. People are still trying to figure out what happened, because the industry started about the same time in the 50s throughout America.
Okay.
But the trajectory of the rents went a whole different direction in the Southeast. It never, it's like a failure to launch, never took off. So you'll still find rents in some areas like Mississippi at $75 a month, which you can't even make any money at all at $75 a month for lot rent.
Yeah.
Won't even cover your costs. So the mom and pops down there, rather than raise the rents for some weird reason, they just went in the home business. So it's a different segment of the industry. No one knows historically why it evolved that way, but it just kind of did. Now it's changing, because in some areas like Atlanta, some of the bigger cities of Alabama, home prices have gone up a lot. They've done really good on getting jobs. And so in those markets now, you're seeing the lot rents go back up to around the rest of the nation levels. But in the rest of the Southeast, the lot rents are very, very low.
Interesting. That's interesting. So what about the other issue as far as the septic water? You only buy if it's on water, town water or something to that effect. Is that another criteria that you look for?
Yeah, it's definitely a big criteria to us. Now we will buy and do own some water well. We do own some septic. We do own some packaging plant. We even own one lagoon, only because there's city sewer nearby. But it's a negative. When you look at a mobile home park, there are basically 5 key factors that make you buy it or not: infrastructure, density, location, the age of the homes in the park, and the economics. And if you score very highly in one, then you can score very poorly in another. And what you find in the industry is, because they haven't allowed these to be built in about a half a century, there is no perfect park. So the parks with the great locations have the worst infrastructure and the worst density. So you're always in this battle, this cage fight between those different key sectors. So if you find a park that has great density and great utilities, it probably is relatively newer and probably does not have as good a location. So that's the struggle of buying parks.
Okay. Are they building any new parks nowadays?
They build in the entire U.S. roughly 10 a year, and they tear down roughly 100. So we are an endangered species. We're shrinking at the rate of about 100 units a year. There's 44,000 parks in the U.S. So, but they haven't allowed any new ones in any quantities since about the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, what's their alternative? The forefathers of each town and city are turning to some other form of housing?
No, they just don't they don't want affordable housing. I mean, if you're a city, affordable housing is a terrible idea, right? Economically. Let me give you an example. We have a park in Missouri in a medium-sized town, and just about every resident in the property has at least one kid. Those kids cost the city about $8,000 a year to educate, but the property tax on the lot is valued at about $50,000. So they get $500 a year on the lot, and the homes are valued about $5,000. So they get $50. So they're taking $550 per household in tax, and they're spending out $8,000. So that one park is losing about $1 million a year. Now, if you're the city, the idea of losing $1 million a year on a single property isn't really encouraging, and you sure don't want to have any more mobile home parks. But then the problem is they can't legally say or do that because that violates the government's duty to serve rules. So what the city has figured out is they had this very clever construction. What they'll do is, if you want to build a new mobile home park, they will aggressively notify everyone, not just those who they mail out the little notification to.
Butters.
This will spread the word through the entire greater town. And then when you have your big zoning meeting, the entire town shows up with pitchforks and flaming torches against it. And then they blame it all on the people. So they'll, in their thing, say, well, we're going to have to turn it down, but we think it was a great idea. But clearly, the town people have spoken, and we represent the people. So as much as we'd love to have this great affordable housing opportunity, we're just going to have to deny it. It's the greatest racket in the world, and they've been using that now for 50 years, and no one's ever been able to figure out how to not have it happen. It's just human nature, unlikely to ever change.
You know, I got to tell you, it is so. Well, it's the old "not in my backyard" concept, and I'm seeing it play out in the town next to where I am. Very affluent town, and I'm up here in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire has workforce housing rules, and you've got to have. And they passed a law that said each city and town has to, accommodate so much affordable housing in their town.
Right.
Well, it's the liberals who came up with that idea up in Concord, but it's the liberals down here in the nice affluent town that say, no, we don't want that. Like, so what do you do? And the guys sitting on the selectmen, board of selectmen are like, guys, don't burn us at the stake. The Concord is telling us what we have to do. And you elected the state rep. The new state rep is a Democrat and voted for it. So we're just doing what we're supposed to be doing. It's amazing. And like you said, they walk out of that meeting feeling good about what they did to keep it out of their backyard, but they didn't help anybody.
Yeah, well, the mobile home park business is an equal opportunity insult fest because Republican or Democrat, it doesn't much matter. Everyone hates trailer parks. Always have, always will. It's
Frank,
just when you're in the industry, you have to acknowledge that on the front end.
And you seem like such a nice guy, Frank. You're not out to hurt anybody. You're not out to get anybody. I mean, geez, so that's, oh, wow. All right, now let me ask you something. You mentioned something that got my wheels churning a little bit, the concept of density. And when you said it, I started clicking off in my mind all the mobile home parks I've looked at, and I realized, yeah, wait a minute. I've seen some mobile home parks like you can't fit anybody between them. They're all wedged right in there versus others that are out on bucolic parks, and it looks absolutely beautiful. So when you are looking at a property, is one of the questions you ask, can I add more lots to this? Is that one of the value? Do you guys use that as a value add?
Yeah, you can't add more lots because the parks are all grandfathered.
Okay.
So adding lots impossible. Now, bringing homes into vacant lots, yeah, we do that all the time.
Okay.
So the key items on density that you have to watch out for, one is even though we're grandfathered, we're not grandfathered against health and safety. So if the fire marshal suddenly determines that the homes are too closely spaced, he can actually make you remove some. So most fire marshals in today's world are looking at 10-foot separation between the walls of the homes. That's the norm. Now that's subject to change. If you had a big fire and someone said, oh gosh, well, 10 feet isn't enough, we got to go 20, then you could be in trouble. It's never happened yet, but 10 feet is kind of it. So if you're looking at a mobile home park, and I've looked at some in some northeastern states like Ohio, the separation is only 5 feet. With 5-foot separation, if you buy that park, there's every reason to believe the fire marshal will show up one day and you'll have to half your occupancy. So that's the first problem with density. Next problem is people don't buy 1-bedroom mobile homes. They need 2-bedroom, which means if a lot can't hold a 14 by 48-foot mobile home, you can't get a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. So then your park will die over time through obsolescence because modern people don't live in the tiny little shack mobile homes that our forefathers did. And so At any rate, so the third item is, can you physically get the home in? There are some parks out there. We own one of them that were built sequentially back in the 60s. So let me give you an example. We've got a park in Nebraska, not true throughout the park, but there's a series of cul-de-sac streets that are on some significant terrain. You can't get the mobile homes up the street unless you remove them all. So the home at the very end of the street sits about 7 feet off the ground with a retaining wall. You can't pick a mobile home up and lift it 7 feet in the air, right? You could with a crane or a helicopter, theoretically, but you'd never do that. So I can't replace that home. If that home burned, I can't put a home back on that lot unless I was to move every home on the street to bring it in. And there's many other parks where the street system itself is so tight that you can't get a home down the street.
Wow.
So that's where, again, where density steps in. So even if you have the separation, even if you have the ability to get a 1448, there's a third density issue in some parks that it's physically impossible to get there. When they built the park, they put them in at the end of the street first, literally, stacked them in, and if you look at the age of the homes, you'll see them in exact historical precision. The end one will be a 1959, the next one is 61, then a 63, and all the way up to the 70s. So yeah, density is a workability issue.
Interesting. Now, you talk about having the density, those types of situations if the fire marshal came in. Is that an issue with the takings clause? Is that, the city by imposing that regulation on you, they're taking your property by eminent domain, essentially?
No, it's been ruled not to be. It's the same. Remember when they had the nightclub fire somewhere in the Northeast 20, 30 years ago? Pyrotechnics at a rock show.
Oh, that was in Rhode Island, Pawtucket, Rhode Island,
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Remember then
Jack Russell.
Around.
Jack Russell was the singer, named after the Jack Russell Terrier. 99 people died in that.
99. Okay.
Yep,
well,
yep.
Remember then they went around to all those clubs and they said, wait a minute, this club is dangerous, even though they've been operating for 50 years, and they shut them down. So I don't think that was considered a taking either. So, when you have a fire marshal problem, which you don't all the time.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's considered a taking. It's just considered a health and safety violation.
Yeah. Wow. Oh man. Wow. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, hey, what about this new concept? And could this possibly revitalize the mobile home business? This tiny homes, a wave, fad going on,
Yeah, let me tell you all about that, because that one is definitely a fake news story. What's happening is
no, wait a minute. Hold on. I'm just in my mind. This is my mind thinking. I haven't seen any news story about this. So educate me on this.
Okay, what you have is you have on HGTV.
Right.
They kind of started the trend of the tiny home shows, and they're cool and they build interesting looking little products. Yeah. The problem is,
the thing I like about them, my 4 kids don't fit in there, so they can't come with me.
There you go.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, the problem you have is that mobile homes since 1976 are controlled by the U.S. government through HUD.
Okay.
So every mobile home has to have a HUD seal on it, and that HUD seal says it's safe for full-time occupancy. And when you bring the mobile home into the mobile home park, they won't turn your power on unless you have a HUD seal on it. It's a little metal plate that says certified by HUD. The RV industry doesn't have HUD seals because RVs are considered not habitable full time. Now people do it, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of seniors that live in RVs, but you're not supposed to do it. So when they brought out the HUD seal in 76, they brought out the ANSI seal, which is ANSI code, and that means not meant for permanent household living. So all your RVs have ANSI. Your mobile homes have HUD. Why I'm even telling you this boring story.
No, I love this. This is great.
The tiny homes are ANSI coded because they're not built for full time. The tiny home began as an RV product called the park model. You probably have seen these. If you're going down the highway, you see a COA campground, and you look out by the man-made lake, you'll see a row of cabins. Those are called park models. Okay. And they arrive on skids. They're always under 400 square feet. There's a niche there that if you're under 400 square feet in many jurisdictions, you can build a structure without going through the Uniform Building Code. And the RV industry bought these things and put them around little lakes and rented them out by the night. And the concept was, let's say you've got a big old family reunion at the RV park, but people don't have RVs. Some do, some don't. The ones who don't can stay in little cabin gizmos at the cost of $100 a night to participate in the RV event. Yeah. That's where they came from. So those are not designed nor permitted for full-time living. They're just for temporary living. Problem with the tiny homes is, since they don't have the HUD seal, you can't bring them into a mobile home park. So they're disallowed from a mobile home park. The only place you can put a tiny home is in an RV park. But now the law doesn't allow in an RV park full-time living. Now, they've been looking the other way for decades because who wants to be mean to the seniors?
Grandma. Yeah.
RVs? Nobody. But the problem was with the tiny homes is when the people brought in the kids. There's no kids in an RV I've ever seen. But the tiny home, you see them on the show. The young couple want to live small, want to spend more time with my kids. There's always kids in there somewhere. Well, you can't put the kids in school in the RV park because it's not an approved address for the school system.
Right.
So it's a giant mess. So there's been a whole lot of litigation from people who bought tiny homes only to find they couldn't legally put them anywhere. Now, the field is changing now. All the ones that were built without the HUD seal, they're just basically screwed. The people who today, they are now building HUD-coated tiny homes in some of the factories. Clayton builds some. Other manufacturers build them. But the problem is when you get HUD involved, they're not cool anymore, right? The cool ones you see on TV, those won't be permitted by HUD. So the HUD-coated ones are not nearly as attractive. So no one knows how it will end. It's kind of like Uber. You know, it's a battle of the will of the people versus the old taxi cab franchises. In this case, it's the battle of consumers who don't want to live in ugly things and they want individuality, and HUD says, no, that's not safe. And no one really knows why HUD says, no, that's not safe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's also kind of odd. You know, if you look at the titles of the mobile homes from back in the day, 60s and 70s, those mobile homes are much heavier than modern homes. So the whole concept that HUD was the important feature in safe living is debatable. Many of the old timers tell me that the homes prior to HUD were better built than the ones post HUD. I don't know. I'm not a manufacturer or an engineer, but I know something has to give for the tiny home movement to take root, because right now the tiny home movement is basically based on the illegality for the most part.
And that's because the government just doesn't move fast enough.
Well, that, and once again, you know, nobody wants affordable housing in their backyard.
Yeah.
And so if they were to allow tiny homes or new tiny home developments to be built, you'd be back in the same old money-losing situation that the cities face with the existing parks. So that's why there's not a big rush to allow them to be built.
But if HUD changes the laws and puts their seal of approval on these tiny homes, granted it's not cool anymore because part of the tiny home is like living off the grid type of lifestyle. But what you're saying is that maybe there might be some type of a rebirth for people.
Yeah, I think here's what I think is going to happen. What I think is going to happen is that we've got a real housing crisis in the U.S. on affordability. It's just a disaster. I'm seeing a new headline every week that no one can afford to live anywhere anymore, right?
Yeah.
At some point, the cities are going to have to address the issue, and I think it probably will begin with opportunity zones, to be honest with you, because you've got some old mobile home parks in opportunity zones that are sitting there completely abandoned, or they might have 3 units in them. And I envision people taking those and plea bargaining with the city to saying, hey, city, I'll bring this old mobile home park back to life if you allow it to be someplace where I can site tiny homes. And maybe that's where that will come out of. There's also someone who built a tiny home only development in Austin. Now the problem with the tiny home only development he built is he's in it about $100,000 per space. And that's not including the tiny home. That's just the space. Because the cities put so many regulations on the park, they even put rent control on the park. That by the time he got done, it's kind of like one of those deals where you restore an old car, and by the end of the movie, at some point, you're so deep in the car, it makes no economic sense. And yet you have to keep going to finish the car.
Yeah.
So I don't know how deep he was in when he couldn't turn around, but at 100 of space and plus rent control, it's pretty much assured he'll never make any appreciable money out of that. So, I mean, there's little granules, little seeds of something brewing in tiny homes, but it's just not there yet.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. I'm so glad I asked you that question. I had no idea we were going to go down this tangent, but man, I just learned a ton. So, but let's talk a little bit in the last 5 minutes here. Let's talk. I want to learn about MHU.
Sure.
Tell me about your organization, your school. Tell me, are you got any events coming up? You know, what are you doing?
Sure. Well, what MHU is, I know it sounds odd, but back when my partner Dave and I both got in the mobile home park industry, it's a lonely profession because almost nobody is in it. And they just brought out this thing called the internet back then. This is in the mid-90s. And so we started writing little books. My first book was called I'm with Stupid, 50 of the dumbest stories from the trailer park that I'd ever seen. Dave was on accounting, and we put them out there on the internet to see if anyone gave a darn about the industry. And to our shock, there were other people out there running these things who were like, yeah, I want that book. And they'd be like, hey, write another book. So we'd write another little book. And then over time, we took all those little books and put them in a giant bundle. And that basically became our little mobile home course thing. And then people said, can we have like a live event where we actually walk around mobile home parks? So we said, okay, we tried one of those out. And we've been doing those now for not quite a decade. But so basically it's a hobby. And my partner Dave's son Brandon runs the hobby. And we basically, I write almost every day for an hour or so on my experiences each day as a mobile home park owner. And then when I drive around our parks, I get out my iPhone, shoot videos, and you know that's basically it's a lot of fun for me. It's a hobby, kind of a diversion. And it's kind of like model railroading, only it's not. And so our next boot camp event is March 6th through 8th in Orange County, California. So that's the next one of those. We do about 8 of those a year.
Is that where you're located?
No, I'm located in Missouri. My partner Dave is over in Colorado.
Where in Missouri are you?
I am in a tiny town an hour south of St. Louis called St. Genevieve.
Okay, so you weren't, you didn't really care about the Super Bowl then?
No, we cared hugely because obviously it's the only Missouri football team in existence. So since the Rams left St. Louis, everyone went into with the Chiefs. And it's been exciting seeing them change over from a team that could never win to a team that just won the Super Bowl. So
yeah, well, let me just tell you, as a New England Patriots fan, enjoy your ride because you know, based upon the cap, the salary cap, that will be the last Super Bowl you guys win for the next 50 years. So
yeah, I don't think so. I think we're looking pretty good even for next year. I'll tell you.
Okay, Mahomes.
We'll see how it plays out.
I think Mahomes is better now than Brady was in Brady's prime. So that guy's amazing. Great quarterback.
I appreciate that. But of course, as you saw earlier in the season, if Mahomes gets injured, we're all in trouble. So.
Well, hey, it happened to us. We lost Brady for a whole year. Yep. Hey, it happens. He got hurt and you guys still won the Super Bowl. So
that's true.
That's Brady-like. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. So you have it March, first week of March. You've got it in Southern California. People can get to it by going to mhu.com.
Correct.
Which kind of shows everyone that Frank wasn't kidding when he said he was there at the beginning of the internet. It was able to get
right.
Get a name like that.
You could get anything you wanted back then. Any letters you wanted.
And then he's got home study courses, you know, the due diligence manual. I do that for multifamily as well. That's a great one. But man, you get some great courses on here. The mobile home community manager training. I mean, all this stuff is good stuff. And people can find it all right there on mhu.com. And Frank, for being as huge as you are in the industry, you're just a regular guy. You know, your team finally.
Well, I think you'll find it's most mobile home park owners are pretty down to earth, because the industry itself is kind of odd. So you won't find people driving around in limousines going into mobile home parks.
Exactly. But I got to tell you, are you like reprinting that book, the 50 stories of that? I can imagine that book is unbelievable.
Yeah, that book is actually contained inside of that course. If you dig around in there,
okay,
it is in there.
Unbelievable. That's fantastic. Frank, thank you so much for being a guest on the Multifamily Investing Academy's podcast. And I hope to see you around, and best of luck to you. And I'm going to be looking out for this tiny home thing and seeing if Frank, was the soothsayer and figured out exactly which direction the world was going to go with these tiny homes. So,
well, we'll see. We'll see if I'm right or wrong.
All right, good. Thanks, Frank. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Talk to you. Bye-bye.